It's strange how some stories don't begin with blood, or screams, or the sound of a door breaking open. Some tragedies begin with something much quieter, a small moment, a missed sign, a piece of pain someone hides behind a practiced smile. This story, the most heartbreaking murder tale you will ever hear, begins not with a crime, but with a family who loved each other more than anything, and yet somehow missed the storm building right in front of them. You see, not all monsters come from outside. Some are born inside a person who feels invisible, unheard, or forgotten. And in this case, the tragedy wasn't just the murder, it was the years of suffering that led to it. A suffering no one noticed until it was already too late. The family at the center of this case lived in a small, peaceful house on a quiet street, where neighbors waved from porches and children played without fear. From the outside, they looked perfect. A caring mother named Leah, a hard-working father named Daniel, and their son, 16-year-old Matthew, a quiet boy who rarely caused trouble. Their photos showed smiles, birthday candles, vacations, and hugs. But what the photos didn't show was that inside that home, Matthew was slowly fading into someone no one recognized. Someone carrying weight far too heavy for a teenager to bear. It wasn't obvious at first. It never is. It began with tiny changes, longer hours locked in his room, silence during dinner, a glance that lingered too long on nothing. Leah believed it was teenage mood swings. Daniel chalked it up to school stress. But Matthew wasn't moody. He was drowning quietly and painfully in a world that felt too loud, too demanding, too unfair. And he never told them why. The heartbreaking part, he tried. He left small clues, pieces of himself scattered around the house, like quiet cries for help. A school assignment, where he wrote about feeling like a ghost. A cracked phone screen with drafts of messages he never sent. A sketchbook filled with drawings of a boy standing alone while everyone around him smiled. But parents see what they want to see. And they believed that as long as they loved him, nothing could go wrong. They were wrong. The first major sign came 2 weeks before the murder. Leah found Matthew sitting on the backyard swing, long after midnight, staring at the ground. When she touched his shoulder, he flinched as if waking from a nightmare. She asked him if he was okay. He said yes. He wasn't. What she didn't know was that Matthew was hiding something far deeper, a years-long internal war caused by bullying at school, loneliness, and a relentless sense of failure he could never escape. He felt like a burden. He felt misunderstood, and the person he blamed most wasn't the people at school. It was himself. But the guilt he carried twisted into something darker. And soon, that darkness began to attach itself to the one person he needed most, his father. Daniel had always been strict, not abusive, not cruel, just firm, a man who grew up believing that discipline built strength. What he didn't see was that his son didn't need discipline. He needed someone to talk to, someone to listen, someone to see the hurt he could no longer hide. But Daniel didn't see it. Instead, he saw slipping grades, a messy room, late nights, closed doors. So he pushed harder, thinking he was motivating his son. In his mind, he was teaching responsibility. But in Matthew's mind, he was failing his father every single day, and every word, every lecture, every disappointed sigh became another crack inside him. The night everything changed began like any other, quiet, calm, uneventful. The family had dinner together. Daniel asked about school. Matthew lied. Leah smiled and said everything would be okay. And for a moment, maybe it could have been. But at 2:46 a.m., something inside Matthew broke. Not from anger, not from hatred, but from exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of holding everything in. He walked into the living room trembling, holding something in his hands, something he had never touched before, something he wasn't even sure he knew how to use. A weapon that had belonged to his grandfather, hidden in a locked drawer he had no intention of ever opening until that night. He didn't go into his parents' room at first. Instead, he sat on the hallway floor, crying silently, whispering apologies to no one. He stayed there for almost 20 minutes, caught between two terrifying thoughts: the desire to end his own suffering, and the guilt of leaving his parents behind. But pain distorts logic, distorts love, distorts everything. And in that confusion, something inside him shifted. At 3:11 a.m., he walked into his parents' bedroom, not with rage, but with heartbreak. So deep it made him feel numb. Leah woke up first. She saw the tears on his face. She sat up, confused, frightened, asking, "Matthew, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Daniel woke right after. He reached forward, telling his son to put the weapon down. And in that moment, that single, terrible second, Matthew stepped back, blurting out the words that would haunt investigators forever. "I tried to tell you, I really did." What happened in the next moments would break the town, break the family, break everyone who ever knew them. Because this wasn't a crime of hatred. It was a collapse. A moment of emotional explosion from a boy who loved his family but believed he had destroyed it. And when the 911 call came in, the dispatcher heard something she would never forget. A young voice, trembling, shattered, whispering over and over again, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted someone to hear me." The deeper investigators dug into the tragedy, the more they realized that nothing about this case was ordinary. Every new detail seemed to rewrite the entire story, turning what looked like a straightforward heartbreak into something far darker. And as the days passed, the town slowly shifted from mourning to suspicion, sensing that the truth was still hiding in the shadows. After the initial shock faded, a team of behavioral analysts was brought in. Their job was simple: study the victim's life, understand her final weeks, and reconstruct her emotional world. What they found didn't match the picture that had been painted earlier. Friends described her as stressed but hopeful, tired but still trying to build something better. Her messages to close acquaintances revealed plans, goals, and even excitement for the future. This was not someone preparing for tragedy. This was someone trying to escape it. The analysts were especially alarmed by the pattern of fear that appeared in her last conversations. She mentioned strange noises outside at night, objects being moved, the sense of being watched. At first it sounded like anxiety, but then they discovered something undeniable. Several neighbors had also noticed a person walking near her house late at night. Someone they couldn't identify. Someone who vanished every time they tried to get closer. Suddenly her fears didn't sound like imagination. They sounded like witnesses to the beginning of a nightmare. With this information, detectives shifted their attention to those who had access to her home. The list was short: a few friends, a former partner, and someone she had been trying to distance herself from. This individual had a history of unpredictable behavior. Someone who struggled with control, jealousy, and an obsession with keeping people close even when they wanted to leave. At first, this person claimed they hadn't seen her in weeks, but when investigators checked phone records, location pings, and time-stamped messages, the truth cracked open. They had been near her home multiple times in the days before her death. When confronted, the person became defensive, offering excuses that sounded rehearsed, as if prepared long before the police ever arrived. Yet there was one moment where their body language betrayed them. When asked why they kept returning to her house after she had cut ties, they froze, swallowed hard, and gave an answer that made every investigator in the room feel uneasy. "I just wanted to make sure she wasn't forgetting me." It didn't sound like concern. It sounded like control. At the same time, forensic teams searched her home more thoroughly, examining details that had been overlooked. They found fingerprints in places where they didn't belong, footprints near the back window, and a small marking on the floor that suggested forced entry. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but it was enough to prove that someone had been there without consent. A hidden struggle, quiet, contained, but real. As investigators pieced the timeline together, a chilling theory formed. She had been living with the feeling that someone was slowly closing in on her. She just didn't know how close they already were. A week into the investigation, something unexpected happened. A local resident approached police with information they previously hadn't shared. They had seen a car parked across the street from the victim's home late at night. It wasn't a car from the neighborhood, and each time they tried to look closer, it drove away without turning on its headlights. The car was identified through traffic cameras, and when investigators traced it, their suspicion deepened. It belonged to the same person who had been lying about their whereabouts. With pressure mounting, Detectives brought them in for a second interview. But this time, the tone was different. It wasn't casual questioning. It was surgical. The investigators asked quietly, carefully, and with every piece of evidence ready to drop at the perfect moment. The suspect tried to remain calm, but under the weight of proof, their behavior twisted into something fragile and unpredictable. They stopped making sense. Their answers contradicted each other. Their story fell apart like it was never real to begin with. While the interview continued, digital analysts accessed the suspect's devices. What they found changed the trajectory of the entire case. Hundreds of deleted messages, attempts to track the victim's online activity, location data showing repeated visits to her street, and a desperate pattern of messages that grew darker as time went on. It wasn't just obsession, it was fixation. Dangerous, escalating fixation. And then came the most chilling discovery of all. Recordings. Not of the victim directly, but of the suspect talking to themselves, expressing frustration, growing anger, and the belief that she belonged to them. These recordings were never meant to be heard by anyone else, but they exposed the storm inside the suspect's mind. The kind of storm that can turn fear into tragedy. With this evidence, the suspect was brought back in one last time. The room felt different. Heavier, colder. The investigators placed everything on the table and waited for the truth. At first, the suspect stared at the evidence in silence, eyes darting from photo to document, breathing unevenly. Then something unexpected happened. They began to talk, not clearly, not coherently, but in fragments, pieces of truth, mixed with denial, flashes of anger mixed with panic, and the quiet admission that they never meant for things to go that far. Even though they never described the full event, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't an accident. It was a long descent into obsession that ended with irreversible consequences. As the case moved toward trial, the town transformed. The tragedy became a warning, one that echoed in conversations, schools, and families. People who once ignored certain red flags suddenly understood that. Those who thought it could never happen here realized how close danger can live in the shadows. In the end, investigators didn't just solve a case. They exposed a pattern that had been growing quietly behind closed doors. A story not just of loss, but of the silent signs people miss until it's too late. And even though justice was finally set into motion, the heartbreak remained. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't fade easily, because it reminds everyone that the most terrifying stories are not the ones told in movies, but the ones that unfold slowly, quietly, in places we trust the most. Detectives had spent days stitching together every torn thread of Michael and Anna's life, yet something still felt painfully incomplete. It wasn't enough to know who killed Anna. They needed to know why. The real why. The one hidden behind the polite smiles and warm family photos. Because murders like this don't come from monsters. They come from broken people who pretend they're fine until everything inside finally collapses. And on a quiet Wednesday morning, that truth finally surfaced. A neighbor walked into the station with a small, dusty cardboard box. She hesitated before handing it to detectives, whispering that it belonged to Anna. The neighbor had found it in Anna's storage shed, an old box Anna never wanted Michael to see. And inside that box was the emotional earthquake investigators didn't expect. At the top was a worn-out notebook. Simple, gray, nothing special. But the moment detectives turned its first page, everything inside the case shifted. Anna had been writing a private journal for nearly 2 years. Not about her career, not about her dreams, but about Michael, his breakdowns, his disappearing hours, his bursts of anger, his crippling fear of failing as a husband. She wrote about how Michael had been quietly drowning, completely unseen by everyone around him. He had lost his job 8 months before the murder, but couldn't bear to tell anyone. Every evening, he pretended he was still employed, leaving the house, driving around the city aimlessly, sitting in quiet parking lots, writing apology notes he never gave to Anna. But what hit detectives the hardest was Anna's tone. She wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She was heartbroken that the man she loved was falling apart silently, choosing shame instead of asking for help. And then there was the page that tore through everyone reading it. I know he's scared. I know he thinks he's failing us. But I wish he knew the truth. I don't need him to be strong for me. I just need him to let me in. The journal didn't excuse the crime, but it painted the fullest picture yet of the emotional storm building inside their home. A storm Anna saw, but Michael hid. Detectives took the journal to the interrogation room, not to corner Michael, but to confront him with the reality he had been running from long before he laid a hand on his wife. When Michael saw the notebook, his breath collapsed. His hands shook violently and his face froze. He whispered Anna's name like a prayer he no longer deserved to say. Tears poured down, but he didn't try to wipe them away. For the first time, he didn't hide. I thought she'd leave me, he whispered. I thought I was saving her from a useless husband. I thought if she knew how weak I really was, she'd stop loving me. Detectives stayed quiet. Michael continued, voice breaking into pieces. I didn't mean to kill her, I swear. We argued, yes, but she said she knew I was lying. She said she was ready to help me. And I snapped, not at her, at myself, at everything I failed to be, and she tried to calm me. She reached for my hand, and I pushed her too hard. Too hard. His sobs filled the cold room. Raw, helpless, ugly. There was no victory for detectives in this confession. Only the heavy truth of a tragedy that could have been prevented with a single honest conversation. The trial began 3 months later, and the courtroom was packed. Not because the murder was sensational, but because the story was devastatingly human. People expected a monster to enter the room, but instead, Michael walked in, thin, broken, barely able to lift his eyes. The community didn't know whether to despise him or pity him. Anna's parents sat in the front row. The pain on their faces was indescribable. Grief mixed with the haunting image of the man who once sat at their dinner table, laughing with their daughter, now sitting behind bars awaiting judgment. The prosecution painted the picture clearly, a brutal act that cost a woman her life. The defense didn't deny the crime. They focused on the emotional collapse behind it. But the moment that sealed Michael's fate wasn't from the lawyers. It came from Anna's mother. She stood up during sentencing, hands trembling, voice weak but steady. My daughter loved him, she said softly. She worried for him. And in the end, his silence killed her. I don't forgive him, but I don't hate him either. I just hope no one else hides their pain the way he did. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Michael received 32 years in prison. No cheers, no relief, just quiet heartbreak settling across the room. Because this wasn't a story of evil, it was a story of emotional wounds left untreated until they exploded into irreversible tragedy. After the sentencing, detectives returned to Anna's home one last time. The house felt different now, not like a place of violence, but like a place filled with unspoken words. On the bedroom wall, behind a piece of furniture, they found a small sticky note Anna had written. Michael, we'll get through anything. Just talk to me. It was the final blow, the last reminder of the love she carried until the end. The documentary closes with one message. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest pain. And sometimes tragedies don't begin with violence, but with silence. And that is why this remains the most heartbreaking murder story you will ever hear.